Today we're covering a major shocking development. Charlie Kirk has been assassinated while speaking at a university event in Utah. Now, this isn't just another isolated tragedy, it is a symptom of a deeply violent and decaying political system in the United States. Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck at a Turning Point University event in Utah. He later died in surgery on September 10th, marking one of the most high-profile political assassinations in recent U.S. history. The assailant has not been caught, and 2 suspects have already been released, and many have expressed bewilderment on social media over the FBI's handling of the situation. The event Kirk was assassinated at was meant to push his Prove Me Wrong tour, a public provocative space for debates on culture war issues. Regardless of your opinion on Kirk, this was an act of political violence and one that demands deeper analysis. We live in a country that breeds violence not just abroad but at home. U.S. society itself is militarized, alienated, and polarized to the point of explosion. Rising inequality, a breakdown of social cohesion, police and intel agencies out of control. The corporate media pretends this event comes out of nowhere, but decades of bipartisan war, inequality, and censorship have created an unstable political environment. Just like mass shootings, which occur nearly every day in the United States, this isn't about lone wolves. It's about a system rotting from the inside out. Kirk was a divisive figure, and everyone is entitled to their opinions about him. But that doesn't justify political assassination, and we have to be very curious of this. Now watch how the corporate media handles this. They're going to do exactly what they have done in other instances. They'll use this event to push censorship rather than root causes, a la Russiagate. We will be pushed to fight over our emotions. We already see people in the pro-Kirk corporate right using this to escalate calls for authoritarian crackdowns on their opposition. In the end, none of the elite factions debating this will talk about the deeper root causes of political instability and strife. Now, American violence doesn't just stay overseas, it boomerangs back. U.S. violence abroad is coming home. The U.S., and we're talking on September 11th, has killed millions since then around the world. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Ukraine, we can go on and on and on. Palestine. Kirk was an ardent defender now of Israel, which routinely kills journalists and has committed genocide against the Palestinian people with not just U.S. support, but U.S. facilitation. Now, I've seen many saying that Kirk's questioning of the Epstein case, how the files were handled, and his modest critiques of Israel of late, even going on Megyn Kelly's show lamenting about fanatical Israel supporters harassing him, supports the possibility that Israel was involved in his assassination. Of course, we should ask questions. We should always be questioning the role of the U.S.-Israeli state, yes, I said those in one word, in anything as significant as what just happened, but we need more evidence to prove this point. Young people in this country, though, what we do know is that they grow up in a country that celebrates death and conquest, assassinations, killings, and normalizes all of this. The arms industry has flooded the United States with guns. School shootings are routine. Now political assassinations too, because we live in a society that treats life as disposable. Therefore, there's a huge market. Now, Kirk promoted pro-Israel, anti-China, and also other neocon foreign policy views, but ironically, he is now a victim of the very chaos that the U.S. promotes worldwide on both sides of the political spectrum. Now, let me say this because it needs to be said. I disagree with Charlie Kirk on almost everything, but I'm also not going to sit here and act like it is effective or helpful to dance on his grave. Kirk was a reactionary. He pushed false narratives, especially around what this channel focuses on, foreign policy. And his domestic views were something that I didn't agree with either, whether it comes to race in the United States or anything else. But if we embrace and tolerate this kind of political violence, then we miss a bigger point, and that is that we need to defeat the powerful, the elites, with clarity, not with random acts of violence that absolutely do nothing but blow back on us. And we've seen this over and over and over again across the history of the United States. We have to ask ourselves, where does this actually lead us? The United States is signal posting the road to collapse. The U.S. is entering a period of civil unrest and ideological warfare. Political violence will likely increase, and elites will use it to consolidate power. The 2024 election, the 2016 election, already has dangerous momentum. We saw this with the censorship, the economic instability that has been thrust upon not just people of the United States, but the rest of the world. We've seen how, for example, Israel, which Charlie Kirk did support 150%, let's be honest, he never really mentioned that Israel is one of the most violent when it comes to political assassinations and also censorship. Israel routinely censors what it does. It not targets journalists, and it also conducts assassination attempt after assassination attempt, whether it be Yemen, Lebanon, and now we've seen in Qatar with its targeting of Hamas negotiators, and we saw this back in June with Iran in the attempt to assassinate not only the supreme leader of Iran, but also the president, which has been confirmed, President Pezeshkian. So reasons are not being considered why this is actually a tragedy, what happened to Charlie Kirk. It's not unique. With figures as powerful and influential as someone who was backed by the establishment in Kirk, we need to look beyond personalities and our feelings about the person. This is really a sign of where the United States is headed, and if we don't fight for a better system, things will only get worse. We need to oppose violence at the roots from which they spring, the social order that breeds conditions of political repression. We need to renew our focus on the most oppressed around us and double down on our efforts to stop U.S. warmongering and state repression of the most vulnerable and exploited. We need to build real solidarity, reject the two-party duopoly keeping us shackled into now violent elite on elite arguments and debates, and unite against an empire that is collapsing. Whether it's Kirk or Trump or anyone else, political violence definitely will not save us. Only truth and organization and resistance to empire will. Now, I've seen prominent U.S. politicians from Barack Obama to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say political violence has no place in the United States or in our country, and I am here to tell all of you that that is absolutely false. The United States has a long track record of political violence, from John F. Kennedy to Martin Luther King to Malcolm X and many other prominent and not so prominent leaders of movements or ideas that were not popular with the political establishment. The U.S. has political prisoners. We have to understand this. This is the truth. Look at what happened to Julian Assange. He was persecuted. He was tortured for years because of his commitment to truth and journalism. And let's be quite clear that while I disagree with a lot of, if not all of what Donald Trump does on the policy realm, he was also politically persecuted by the elites and what I call elite on elite violence. So political persecution, political violence is something that permeates United States society. And we have to look at political violence as much bigger than even just what the U.S. does within its own borders. The United States is committing political violence everywhere around the world. Look at what is happening in Nepal right now. We see U.S. snipers walking around on the rooftops as this political unrest, which the main organization is funded by Coca-Cola, as friend of the show Brian Berletic has pointed out. We know that color revolutions are another form of this kind of political violence. And this is just scratching the surface. U.S. foreign policy is built on political violence. The United States brutally overthrows governments. It's done so to over 50 since World War II, and that number keeps on going up as the United States now shifts its priorities to Venezuela, where it is quite obvious that Donald Trump is looking to overthrow the leadership of Nicolas Maduro there. We just had Israel armed with U.S. fighter jets bomb Yemen and kill what was said to be much of its so-called Houthi leadership, but which ended up actually being civilian political leadership and hasn't really deterred anything. But if we look at the body count, if we look at the level of violence that the U.S. since 2023, since the so-called Al-Aqsa flood, since the events that happened in October 2023, it is absolutely astounding that anyone could believe that political violence has no place in the United States. In fact, political violence sits and rests and does all of its work in Washington, in the Pentagon, in the chambers of Congress. That is where political violence really rests. And it is that political violence which affects all of society. We have to understand that when powerful people do things like bomb other countries, kill women and children, destabilize and destroy political movements and development models that they don't like, they are sending a message, not just to the rest of the world to be afraid of them, but to their own people as well. This is why there is so much fear of the U.S. government, so much distrust, because none of these wars actually serve the interests of the people they pretend to be representing out there in the chambers of power in Washington. In fact, when we look at political violence around the world, we have to understand that the U.S. empire, not the people don't have any ability to decide what goes on and what kind of wars are waged. They can only resist and reject it afterward. And this is the situation that we find ourselves in. So Charlie Kirk's assassination now, one could argue that it's a far stretch to say that this is a byproduct of what the establishment, what the neocons, what the foreign policy elites are doing all over the world. But I would reject this wholeheartedly. In order to understand how such an operation could occur, we have to understand that no matter who did it, we will find this out eventually, or maybe we won't. But at the end of the day, when we look at the very strange and mysterious surroundings that revolve this event, the conditions that surround this event, and when we look at what the United States as a system is and how it has betrayed so many people, how it has destroyed the foundations of what it supposedly represents, which I would argue never really represented fully in the first place, but we have obviously seen a marked decline in whatever it served, whatever it was able to offer anyone. Now we are seeing that only a tiny few people are served by an agenda of endless war, hegemony, rising plunder, inequality, economic theft and exploitation, and of course now the repression and the violence needed to maintain all of this. So this is not isolated. This is political violence in a microcosm. This is about what it means for the United States to be in a situation where it is coming apart at the seams. The collapse is basically here, and it is up to us to not just be vigilant about it, but to make sure that we're directing our rage, our anger, our feelings, our emotions, even our celebrations, or if we're happy. I see so many people very sad, mourning, or happy and celebrating this. But to me, all of this is not at all the point. The point is that we need to look at the root causes of this. We need to look at the truth. We need to ask questions. This is September 11th, and since September 11th, the capacity to ask questions has diminished in the United States. The space has diminished. The corporate media has consolidated. The censorship has gotten worse. The elites have become fewer and fewer, and they have taken up more and more wealth, and they have made it so questioning U.S. foreign policy is dangerous. It could lead to the ruination of your journalistic career. It could lead to imprisonment. It could lead you to being called an agent of a foreign government, which is happening all of the time. It could lead you to be deported, like many Chinese scientists are being deported. It could lead to the loss of a passport. Friend of the show, Scott Ritter, had that happen to him. It could lead to so many bad situations, and that is the chilling effect, which leads to the least helpful of narratives, the least helpful of divisions, the least helpful of conflicts to be amplified. So now we're fighting over partisan differences. We're fighting over questions that might actually be very important. People's disagreements with Charlie Kirk, 100% important. Many of them, a lot of them are important to so many people. And I'm not going to denigrate those at all. But if we look at it through the lens of Charlie Kirk and hate him, love him, we're missing the point of what such an event like this really does for the U.S. political environment. It's going to only cause more instability. It's going to cause more violent rhetoric from the section of the elite who finds this to be advantageous to them. This is also going to cause a deeper and deeper rift among especially working people who are awash in the propaganda, whether it was Charlie Kirk's or whether it is the so-called liberal elites. They are washing us all with propaganda to get us to sanction their wars, to get us to fight over issues that either have little material significance to us or don't really need to be fought over at all, because maybe we should just let people be people, and we should start to focus on political agendas that serve all of us and that will uplift as many people as possible from the suffering and the misery that characterizes so much of economic and political life in the United States. This is the truth. This is why American exceptionalism is so powerful, because what American exceptionalism does is it narrows the debate, it narrows the conversation into acceptable means of protest. And those acceptable means of protest now are actually becoming more and more violent and unstable themselves, because there is a cauldron building politically. And that cauldron has to be called out. It has to be rejected. And we need to do the most important thing right now for humanity, which is to fight for genuine peace and to stop this empire. This show is dedicated to that. This show is dedicated to looking at what the empire is doing, because you're not going to find it in mainstream media, and actually much of the alternative media won't focus on it in detail either. We need to know all of the intricacies of how the United States is destabilizing Ukraine in order to fight a war with Russia, one that is easily already in the realm of World War III. The same goes for what the U.S. is doing to China, to Iran, to the multipolar world. Why the U.S. is resisting so hard its collapsing hegemonic status, and why this actually says a lot about what the United States also is within its own borders. We have a lot of questions to answer. We have a lot of healing to do. But in order to do this, we're going to have to address events like what happened to Charlie Kirk, his political assassination, from the root cause. And I also want to say one note about Israel now, because many people are going to debate the role of Israel in Charlie Kirk's assassination, as well as how Charlie Kirk's views on Israel were really a smoking gun, so to speak, for the violence that was done to him. And I just have to say this, that this is the point. This is exactly how Benjamin Netanyahu, how the Israelis, how they want the United States to be. They want it to be divided. They want it to be debating about Israel to the point where Israel's actions in Gaza, Israel, what it is doing to Iran, what it wants to do to the region. It wants to see the United States, especially the people, not focusing on what the U.S. is doing with Israel to cause so much pain and suffering, but to lay all of our animus onto an individual who really just reflects what a lot of the so-called MAGA movement, if we can call it that, or the MAGA wing of the Republican Party and the GOP, and what many people in the political establishment overall view Israel as its partner, as its friend, and as something to defend to the very end. And for those who believe that Israel could be responsible for this, do your investigation. Seek what might be the truth about this. But at the end of the day, we definitely need more evidence and more proof of this before we can jump to such a conclusion. But it would not be out of the realm of impossibility, or out of the realm of possibility, so to speak, if Charlie Kirk's questioning of the Epstein file as someone who's being high profile would put him under a microscope and possibly as someone who would need to be silenced. So I'm not going to put that out of the question at all. However, we need to look at what this form of political violence really does in the United States and how it's going to affect real policy, and it's how it's going to affect us. The ruling elite, the U.S. foreign policy elite, the neocons, the establishment, overall, they're always going to use this for their purposes of more repression, taking away more freedoms, and pushing more wars. And those wars are blowing back